The morning sun beat down on Ash Fork, Arizona territory, in the summer of 1882, and Delilah Foster stood in the dusty street wearing a wedding dress that belonged to someone else's dreams. Her hands trembled as she gripped the borrowed lace at her waist. Staring at the church doors, she couldn't force herself to walk through, knowing the man waiting inside deserved better than the lies she'd been living for the past 6 months. The dress felt like chains, beautiful white chains that bound her to a future built on deception. Behind those wooden doors, Thomas Garrett waited at the altar, a good man who believed she was a schoolteacher from Philadelphia, a respectable woman with a respectable past. The truth burned in her throat like whiskey, threatening to choke her with every breath. She wasn't from Philadelphia. She'd never been a schoolteacher, and the past she'd run from in Missouri would destroy Thomas if it ever caught up to them. Delilah had arrived in Ash Fork 6 months ago on the afternoon stage, carrying nothing but a worn carpetbag and enough shame to fill the Grand Canyon. The town was small, dusty, and perfect for disappearing. A handful of buildings lined the main street, including the Silver Star Saloon, the general store, the church, and the boarding house where she'd taken a room. She'd planned to keep moving west, maybe to California, but Thomas had changed those plans. He'd introduced himself the very first day, tipping his hat outside the general store, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. He ran the town's only bank, a modest establishment that served the ranchers and merchants of the area. Thomas was steady, reliable, everything Delilah had never known. When he'd started courting her, she'd told herself she could become the woman he thought she was. She could bury Delilah Foster, former saloon girl and worse, and transform into someone worthy of a man like Thomas Garrett. But standing here now, she knew she couldn't go through with it. The sound of boots on wood made her turn. A cowboy stood on the church steps, tall and lean in dark trousers and a dusty shirt, his hat tilted back to reveal a face weathered by sun and wind. She didn't recognize him, which was unusual in a town as small as Ash Fork. His eyes were in startling shade of blue, and they looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You look like a woman contemplating a jailbreak," he said, his voice low and rough, with a trace of humor that didn't quite mask the concern beneath. Delilah laughed, a broken sound that was almost a sob. "Is it that obvious? Only to someone who stood where you're standing." He descended the steps slowly, moving with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Name's Caleb Foster. I'm the bride's cousin, supposedly, though I'm guessing you don't remember inviting me." The shared surname hit her like a slap. Foster wasn't exactly uncommon, but the coincidence felt like fate pointing a finger. "Delilah Foster," she said. "And you're right, I don't remember inviting you because I didn't. I don't have any family." "I know." Caleb stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the faint scar running along his jawline. "I'm not really your cousin. I'm a friend of Thomas Garrett. We rode together years ago before he settled here. He sent word about the wedding and I came to stand up for him." "Then you should go back inside and tell him I'm sorry." Delilah turned away, unable to bear the weight of those blue eyes. "Tell him I'm not who he thinks I am. Tell him he deserves better." "Why don't you tell him yourself?" "Because I'm a coward." The words tasted bitter. "I've spent 6 months lying to him about everything. My past, my family, who I am. He thinks I'm respectable." "And you're not." Delilah spun back to face him, anger flaring hot and defensive. "I worked in a saloon in Missouri, not just serving drinks either. I did what I had to do to survive after my parents died. I stole money from a man who'd paid for my time, a dangerous man, because he'd hurt one of the other girls and I knew he'd do worse. I ran with that money and I've been running ever since. That's who I am." That's what Thomas doesn't know. Caleb's expression didn't change. No shock, no disgust, just that same steady regard. We've all done things we're not proud of. Not things like that. You don't know what I've done. He moved closer, and Delilah caught the scent of leather and sage. You don't know that I spent 3 years in Yuma prison for a crime I did commit, or that I killed 2 men before I was 20 years old. You don't know that I've made so many mistakes I've lost count. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Delilah stared at him, this stranger who just handed her his darkest secrets like an offering. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because you look like you think you're the only one carrying weight." Caleb's voice gentled. "And because Thomas Garrett is a good man who deserves an honest woman, but forcing yourself to marry him when you're clearly not ready isn't honest either. It's just a different kind of lie." Delilah's eyes burned with tears. "What am I supposed to do? I told him I'd marry him. The whole town is in there waiting. I can't just walk away." "Why not?" "Because I have nowhere else to go. Because I'm tired of running. Because for 6 months I've felt safe here and I don't want to give that up." "Then don't marry Thomas, but stay in Ash Fork anyway." Caleb pulled off his hat, running a hand through dark hair. "Tell him the truth. Give him the choice. If he still wants to marry you knowing everything, then you'll know it's real. And if he doesn't, well, this town's big enough for you to make a fresh start without him." The simplicity of it was almost laughable. Tell the truth. She'd been running from the truth for so long she'd forgotten it was an option. "He'll hate me," she said. "Maybe. Or maybe he'll surprise you." Caleb settled his hat back on his head. "But either way, you won't be building a marriage on lies." Inside the church, someone started playing the piano. The wedding march, sweet and pure, drifting through the closed doors. It was time. Delilah looked down at the white dress, at the bouquet of wildflowers someone had pressed into her hands that morning, and made her decision. She walked up the church steps, past Caleb, and pushed open the doors. The church was full. It seemed like every person in Ash Fork had turned out for the wedding. They sat in neat rows, heads turning as she appeared in the doorway. At the front, Thomas stood beside the reverend, his face lighting up when he saw her. Delilah walked down the aisle slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. The faces around her blurred. All she could see was Thomas, kind and good and completely unaware that she was about to shatter his world. She reached the altar and stopped. Thomas reached for her hand, but she pulled back. "I can't do this," she said, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "I'm sorry, Thomas. I've made mistakes. I've lied to you about who I am, where I come from, everything. You deserve to know the truth before you marry me." The color drained from Thomas's face. "Delilah, what are you talking about?" Behind her, she heard whispers starting, scandalous and excited. She ignored them, focusing only on Thomas. "I'm not from Philadelphia. I never was a school teacher. I worked in a saloon in Missouri, and I ran away after stealing from a customer. I came here to hide, and I let you believe I was someone I'm not because I was too afraid to tell you the truth." Thomas stared at her, his hand dropping to his side. The silence stretched, painful and absolute. Delilah watched emotions flicker across his face. Shock, hurt, confusion, anger. "You've been lying to me for 6 months." His voice was quiet, dangerous in its calmness. "Yes, about everything, about my past, not about my feelings for you. Those were real." Thomas stepped back, shaking his head. "I don't even know who you are. I know, I'm sorry." Delilah set the bouquet on the altar rail, her hand steadier now that the truth was out. "I should have told you sooner. I should have told you before I accepted your proposal. I was wrong." The reverend cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No." Thomas's voice was hard. "I think everyone's heard enough. The wedding is off." He looked at Delilah, and the hurt in his eyes cut deeper than any anger could have. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Miss Foster, but you won't find it with me." He turned and walked out through the side door, his footsteps echoing in the silent church. Delilah stood alone at the altar, facing a congregation full of shocked, judgmental faces. The weight of their stares pressed down on her like a physical thing. Then Caleb was there, appearing at her side. He didn't touch her, didn't say anything, just stood beside her in silent support. His presence gave her the strength to hold her head high as she walked back down the aisle, through the whispers and the gasps, out into the brutal Arizona sunshine. Outside, she finally let herself breathe. The air tasted like dust and freedom. "You did the right thing," Caleb said quietly. "Then why does it feel so terrible?" "Because the right thing usually does at first." He gestured toward the street. "Come on, let's get you out of that dress." Delilah looked down at the white lace, suddenly desperate to be free of it. "I'm staying at the boarding house, Mrs. Patterson's place." They walked through town together, and Delilah felt every eye watching them through windows and doorways. The story would be all over Ash Fork within the hour. Delilah Foster, the fallen woman who'd almost tricked Thomas Garrett into marrying her. She'd be lucky if Mrs. Patterson didn't throw her out before nightfall. But when they reached the boarding house, Mrs. Patterson was sitting on the porch in her rocking chair, her weathered face unreadable. She looked Delilah up and down, then nodded toward the door. "Go change, girl, then come back down. We need to talk." Delilah's room was small and plain, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for her few belongings. She stripped off the wedding dress with shaking hands, hanging it carefully before pulling on a simple blue calico dress. When she looked in the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back looked young and frightened and lost. She pinned her dark hair into a simple bun and went back downstairs. Mrs. Patterson was in the kitchen, and the smell of coffee filled the air. Caleb sat at the table, his hat on the chair beside him. "Sit," Mrs. Patterson commanded, pouring coffee into 3 cups. "Now, I expect half the town is talking about what happened in that church." "Yes, madam." Delilah wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to hold on to. "And I expect they're saying some pretty ugly things about you. I deserve it. I lied to Thomas. I lied to everyone." Mrs. Patterson snorted. "Everyone lies, girl. The only difference is what they lie about and whether they get caught." She settled into a chair across from Delilah, her sharp eyes softening. "You've been a good tenant these 6 months. Quiet, polite, always paid your rent on time. Whatever you did before you came here, that's your business. You want to stay, you can stay." The relief was so intense Delilah felt dizzy. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You'll have to find work, and that won't be easy now. Thomas had been supporting you, hadn't he?" Delilah nodded, shame heating her cheeks. "He insisted. He said it wasn't proper for his intended to work." "Well, you're not his intended anymore, so you'll need to support yourself." Mrs. Patterson sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "I could use help around here. Cooking, cleaning, tending to the other boarders. It won't pay much, but it'll cover your room and give you a bit extra. I'll take it." Delilah didn't hesitate. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. You don't know what this means." "I know what it's like to be a woman alone in a hard world," the older woman said. "We help each other when we can." She turned her attention to Caleb. "And you, young man, I have a room available if you're staying in town." Caleb glanced at Delilah. "I hadn't planned on it. I was just passing through to see Thomas." "But you'll stay now," Mrs. Patterson said. It wasn't a question. After a moment, Caleb nodded. "I'll stay for a bit." Delilah wanted to ask why, wanted to know what had changed his mind, but she kept quiet. She had no claim on this stranger, no right to his reasons. He'd already done more for her than she had any right to expect. The next few days were harder than Delilah had anticipated. The people of Ash Fork weren't forgiving. Women crossed the street to avoid her. Men stared with open curiosity or thinly veiled contempt. The general store owner served her, but his wife made sure to stand nearby, watching to ensure Delilah didn't steal anything. She threw herself into work at the boarding house, scrubbing floors until her hands were raw, cooking meals for the handful of boarders who came through. Mrs. Patterson was demanding but fair, and the physical labor helped quiet the thoughts that circled endlessly in Delilah's mind. Caleb stayed. He took the small room at the end of the hall and spent his days doing odd jobs around town. He fixed Mrs. Patterson's sagging porch steps, mended fences for the livery owner, helped the blacksmith shoe horses. He worked hard and said little, but Delilah found herself watching for him, listening for the sound of his boots on the stairs. A week after the failed wedding, Thomas came to the boarding house. Delilah was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when Mrs. Patterson called her to the parlor. She wiped the flour from her hands and went, her heart in her throat. Thomas stood by the window, looking older than she remembered. He turned when she entered, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. "I came to return your things," he said finally, gesturing to a small box on the table. "The books I'd bought you, the shawl, the hair combs." "Thomas, I'm so sorry." He held up a hand. "I didn't come for apologies. I came because I needed to understand. Why did you lie?" "If you needed help, if you were in trouble, I would have helped you regardless." Delilah sank into a chair, the weight of the past week crushing down on her. "I was ashamed. I thought if you knew the truth, you'd see me the way I saw myself, as something dirty, something used and worthless." "I never would have thought that. You say that now, but you don't know what I did. You don't know the men I was with, the things I let them do because I needed the money to eat. You don't know what it's like to sell pieces of yourself until you don't even recognize who you are anymore." Thomas's jaw tightened. "You're right, I don't know, but I would have tried to understand if you'd given me the chance. I know, that's what makes it worse." Delilah looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "You're a good man, Thomas, the best I've ever known. You deserved better than my lies." He was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the dusty street. Finally, he said, "I loved who I thought you were, but I realize now that I never really knew you. Maybe we were both living a dream that was never real. Maybe. I hope you find peace, Delilah, I really do." He picked up his hat and moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're worthless. I think you're a woman who survived the only way she knew how. There's no shame in that." He left, and Delilah sat alone in the parlor, crying for what might have been and what never really was. Caleb found her there an hour later. He didn't ask questions, just sat down beside her and handed her his handkerchief. It smelled like leather and sage, comforting in its simplicity. "He came to say goodbye," Delilah said when she could speak again. "That was good of him. He said he loved who he thought I was, not who I am." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "And who are you, Delilah Foster?" "I don't know any more." She twisted the handkerchief in her hands. "I've been so many different people. The girl whose parents died when she was 16. The saloon girl who did what she had to. The runaway thief. The respectable school teacher. I don't know which one is real. Maybe they all are." Caleb stretched out his long legs, crossing his boots at the ankle. "We're not just one thing, any of us. We're all the things we've been, all the choices we've made, good and bad. You said you'd made mistakes too. What did you do?" He didn't answer right away, and Delilah thought he might not answer at all. Then he began to speak, his voice low and measured. "I grew up on a ranch in Texas, youngest of 4 boys. When I was 19, my father died and my oldest brother inherited everything. He was a hard man, my brother. Mean. He started running off our neighbors, trying to expand the ranch, using violence when money didn't work. I went along with it because he was family, because I didn't know how to say no. Caleb's hands clenched on his knees, the knuckles white. There was a Mexican family with a small homestead bordering our land. My brother wanted it. He sent me and my other brothers to burn them out. I didn't want to do it, but I went anyway. I thought maybe I could keep things from getting too bad. What happened? The father fought back. Shots were fired. I killed him. Caleb's voice was flat, empty. His wife and children watched him die. Then we burned their home anyway. Delilah felt sick. How old were the children? Young, too young to be left without a father. He looked at her then, his blue eyes full of old pain. I turned myself in the next day, testified against my brothers. They hanged, but I got prison instead because I'd cooperated. Spent 3 years in Yuma, which is its own kind of hell. And the other man you killed, prison guard. He was beating another inmate to death. I stopped him the only way I could. Caleb stood, moving to the window where Thomas had stood earlier. They let me out after that. Said it was self-defense, protecting another prisoner, but I still killed him, still took a life. Delilah stood and went to him, placing her hand on his arm. Through the fabric of his shirt, she could feel the tension in his muscles. You're not that person anymore, neither are you. He turned to face her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. We can't change what we've done. We can only choose who we want to be from here on. Who do you want to be? Someone better. Someone worthy of a second chance. His hand came up, his fingers gentle as they brushed a tear from her cheek. Who do you want to be? I want to be someone who doesn't run anymore. Someone brave enough to face the consequences of her choices. Delilah's voice steadied. Someone honest. Then be that person. It sounded so simple when he said it. Be honest. Be brave. Stop running. But standing there with Caleb's hand warm against her face, looking into eyes that had seen darkness and survived it, Delilah thought maybe it could be that simple after all. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them had words for. Then Mrs. Patterson's voice rang out from the kitchen, breaking the spell. Delilah, that bread's not going to bake itself. Delilah stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they'd been standing. I should go. Yeah, Caleb's hand dropped to his side. I should get back to work anyway. But neither of them moved, caught in the gravity of what had just passed between them. Finally, Caleb cleared his throat and headed for the door. At the threshold, he paused. Delilah. For what it's worth, I think you're already braver than you know. Then he was gone, and Delilah stood alone in the parlor, her heart beating too fast and her thoughts in chaos. She barely knew this man. He'd been in Ash Fork for only a week, had spoken to her perhaps a dozen times. But something about him called to the deepest parts of her, the broken places she'd been hiding even from herself. She went back to the kitchen and threw herself into work, but she couldn't stop thinking about the look in Caleb's eyes or the feel of his fingers against her skin. The weeks passed, and Ash Fork slowly began to accept Delilah's presence, if not embrace it. She worked hard, kept her head down, and gradually the whispers faded to occasional murmurs. The women still avoided her, but the men at least nodded when they passed her on the street. Caleb stayed on at the boarding house, finding enough work to pay his way. He and Delilah fell into an easy rhythm, sharing meals at Mrs. Patterson's table, sometimes walking together in the evenings when the heat of the day had passed. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing pieces of themselves in small increments. He told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to rope and ride before he could properly walk. She told him about her parents, her mother's gentle laugh and her father's strong hands, and how empty the world had felt when they died within months of each other during a cholera outbreak. I was 16, she said one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sun paint the desert sky in shades of orange and gold. Old enough to work but too young to inherit anything. The bank took our house to settle my father's debts. I had nowhere to go. No other family. An aunt in St. Louis, but she made it clear I wasn't welcome. Said she had enough mouths to feed without adding mine. Delilah picked at a loose thread on her skirt. The saloon owner offered me work. At first, it really was just serving drinks. But the pay wasn't enough to live on, and there were men willing to pay more for more. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I told myself it was temporary, just until I saved enough money to start over somewhere else. But the money never seemed to be enough, and after a while I stopped believing I deserved better anyway. She laughed, a bitter sound. The man I stole from, he'd beaten one of the other girls so badly she lost the sight in one eye. When he came back, drunk and mean, I saw him counting out money from his wallet, a lot of money. I knew if I didn't take it then, I'd never get another chance to escape. So you took it. $200. More money than I'd ever seen. I waited until he passed out, then I took it and ran. Bought a ticket on the first stage out of town and didn't stop until I reached Ash Fork. Delilah turned to look at Caleb. Do you think I'm a thief? I think you're a survivor. That's not an answer. Yes, you're a thief. You stole money that wasn't yours. Caleb met her gaze steadily. But I think that man probably owed you and every other woman in that saloon a hell of a lot more than $200. So no, I don't judge you for it. Delilah felt something tight in her chest loosen. Thank you. For what? For not seeing me as dirty. For not looking at me the way everyone else in this town does. Caleb shifted closer, his shoulder brushing hers. I see a woman who did what she had to do to survive in a world that didn't give her many choices. There's no shame in that. Thomas said something similar, but it felt different coming from him, like pity. This isn't pity, Delilah. Caleb's voice was rough. This is respect. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the truth in his eyes. He did respect her. This man who had every reason to judge her, who carried his own burden of guilt and mistakes, looked at her and saw someone worth respecting. Something shifted between them in that moment, subtle but undeniable. The air felt heavier, charged with possibility. Delilah's heart began to race. Caleb, she began, but he shook his head. Don't, not yet. He stood abruptly, his hands clenched at his sides. You just ended things with Thomas. You're vulnerable, uncertain. I won't take advantage of that. You're not taking advantage of anything. I'm telling you how I feel. And how do you feel? He turned to face her, his expression fierce. Are you sure it's real, or are you just grateful to have someone who doesn't judge you? Are you confusing respect with something more because you're lonely? The questions hit like slaps, forcing Delilah to examine her own heart. Was she developing real feelings for Caleb, or was she simply drawn to his acceptance? She thought about the way her heart lifted when she heard his footsteps, the way she found herself watching for him throughout the day. She thought about the dreams she'd been having, dreams where his hands touched her gently and his lips spoke words of love. I don't know, she admitted finally. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm confused. Caleb's expression softened. Give yourself time. Figure out who you are without Thomas, without anyone. Then we'll talk about this again. He left her on the porch, and Delilah sat alone as darkness fell over Ash Fork. She knew he was right. She needed time to find herself, to become someone whole before she could give herself to anyone else. But knowing that didn't make the loneliness any easier to bear. The next morning, Delilah woke to the sound of shouting in the street. She rushed to the window and saw a group of men on horseback riding hard into town. Even from a distance, she could see they were armed and angry. Mrs. Patterson was already up, standing on the porch with a rifle in her hands. Get inside, girl. Lock the door. What's happening? Trouble by the look of it. Now get inside. Delilah obeyed, but she watched through the window as the riders pulled up in front of the saloon. There were 6 of them, dusty and hard-eyed. The leader dismounted, a big man with a scarred face and cold eyes that swept the street like a hawk looking for prey. Her blood turned to ice. She knew that face, knew those eyes. It was him, the man she'd stolen from in Missouri. Somehow he'd found her. She stumbled back from the window, her mind racing. How had he tracked her? She'd been so careful, had covered her trail. But it didn't matter now. He was here and he would kill her if he found her. Caleb appeared at her door, his face grim. "You know those men?" "The leader. His name is Jack Donovan. He's the one I stole from." Delilah's voice shook. "He's a dangerous man, Caleb. He kills people who cross him." "How dangerous?" "He runs guns and whiskey to the Indian reservations. The girls at the saloon said he'd killed at least a dozen men, maybe more." She gripped Caleb's arm. "You have to leave. If he finds out you've been helping me, he'll kill you too." "I'm not leaving." Caleb's voice was steady. "But we need to figure out what he knows. Stay here. Don't let anyone see you." He left before she could argue. Delilah paced the small room, her heart hammering. Through the window, she could see Caleb walking toward the saloon with an easy confidence that belied the danger. He looked like a man out for a morning stroll, not someone walking into the den of a killer. The wait was agony. Minutes stretched into hours. Finally, Caleb returned, his expression dark. "He's looking for a woman matching your description, says she stole from him, and he's offering a reward for information." Caleb closed the door behind him. $50 to anyone who can tell him where to find Delilah Foster. $50 is a fortune out here. Someone will talk. Probably. Caleb moved to the window, watching the street. "But it might buy us some time. Folks around here have seen what you're made of these past weeks. They might not like you much, but they're not the type to sell a woman out to a man like Donovan. You don't know that." "No, but I'm betting on it." He turned to face her. "We need to get you out of town. Tonight after dark, I'll take you to Flagstaff. You can catch a stage there, head to California. I'm not running again." The words surprised Delilah even as she spoke them. "I'm tired of running, Caleb. I told you I wanted to be brave. This is where that starts. Brave is one thing, stupid is another. That man will kill you. Maybe. Or maybe it's time I face the consequences of what I did." Delilah stood straighter, feeling something like calm settle over her. "I stole from him. That's true. But I did it because he'd hurt someone and I knew he'd hurt others. I'm not sorry for taking his money, but I am sorry for running. For not standing up and saying why I did it. Delilah, this isn't about justice. This is about survival. Then I'll survive by telling the truth." She moved past him to the door. "I'm going to talk to the sheriff." Caleb caught her arm. "The sheriff's not going to protect you from Donovan." "I know. But at least there'll be a record of what happened. If Donovan kills me, maybe someone will care enough to go after him for it." "Damn it, Delilah." Caleb's grip tightened. "You can't throw your life away like this." "I'm not throwing it away. I'm finally living it on my own terms." She looked up at him, seeing the fear and frustration in his eyes. "You said we can only choose who we want to be from here on. This is me choosing." For a long moment he just stared at her. Then, slowly, he released her arm. "If you're doing this, I'm coming with you." "Caleb, no. Not up for debate. You want to face Donovan, fine. But you're not doing it alone." They walked to the sheriff's office together, and Delilah felt strangely calm. This was right. For the first time in years, she was moving toward her problems instead of running from them. Sheriff Tom Hendricks was a grizzled man in his 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen too much. He listened to Delilah's story without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she spoke. "So you admit you stole $200 from Jack Donovan," he said when she finished. "Yes, sir." "That's a serious crime, Miss Foster. I know. But he'd beaten a woman nearly to death, and I knew he'd do it again. I took his money and ran because I was afraid, but I'm not sorry for taking it." Hendricks leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Donovan's been asking around about you. Says you're a thief and he wants his money back." "I don't have it anymore. I spent it getting here and living while I looked for work." "He won't care about that. He'll want blood." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Caleb. "You planning to protect her?" "If necessary. Against 6 armed men, you're either brave or stupid. Both, probably." Caleb's hand rested on the gun at his hip. "But I'm not letting him hurt her." Hendricks was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and pulled a rifle from the rack on the wall. "Well then, guess we'd better make sure it doesn't come to that. You're going to help us?" Delilah couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "I don't much like men who beat women, and I don't much like outsiders coming into my town making threats." The sheriff checked the rifle's load. "Donovan's been drinking at the saloon all morning, working himself up. He'll come looking for you soon. When he does, I want you both here. We'll handle this legal-like." They didn't have to wait long. Within the hour, boots thundered on the wooden walkway outside, and Jack Donovan burst through the door with 2 of his men flanking him. He looked older than Delilah remembered, his face more deeply scarred, but his eyes were just as cold. They fixed on her with recognition and rage. "There you are, you little thief." His voice was rough with whiskey and fury. "I've been looking for you for months." Sheriff Hendricks stepped between them, the rifle held casually but ready. "That's far enough, Donovan. You've got business in my town, you conduct it peaceful." "My business is with her. She stole from me." "So she said. She came to me this morning, admitted what she did." Hendricks's voice was calm but firm. "Now you can file a formal complaint and we'll handle this through the courts, or you can get back on your horse and ride out of Ash Fork." "Your choice." Donovan's face flushed red. "Courts? That horse stole $200 from me." "Watch your mouth in my office," Hendricks snapped. "And if you've got a legitimate grievance, you'll get your day in court. But you come in here making threats and calling names, you'll be the one in a cell." "You think I'm afraid of you, old man?" Donovan's hand dropped to his gun. Everything happened fast. Caleb moved, drawing his own weapon with practiced speed. The sheriff's rifle swung up, aimed at Donovan's chest. For a frozen moment, the room balanced on the edge of violence. Then Donovan's men stepped back, hands raised. "Boss, it's not worth it," one of them muttered. "Not for $200. Donovan's jaw clenched, but slowly he raised his hands away from his gun. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is." Hendricks's voice was steel. "You've got 2 choices. Ride out now, or I'll arrest you for disturbing the peace. If you come back, I'll shoot you for trespassing." Clear, the rage in Donovan's eyes was terrible to see, but he was outnumbered and he knew it. He took a step back, then another, his gaze never leaving Delilah. "You better watch your back, girl. I've got a long memory." "So do I," Delilah said quietly. "I remember what you did to Sarah. I remember the blood. That's why I took your money and I'd do it again." For a moment she thought he'd rush her anyway, consequences be damned. But one of his men grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door. "Come on, boss. She's not worth it." They left and Delilah's legs nearly gave out. Caleb caught her, his arm strong around her waist. "Easy, it's over." "Is it?" She looked at the sheriff. "He's not going to just leave." Hendricks lowered his rifle, his expression grim. "No, probably not, but he'll think twice before making a move in town. Man like that, he's used to getting his way through intimidation. You stood up to him and I backed your play." "That matters. What do we do now? You stay close to town, don't go anywhere alone, and you," he looked at Caleb, "you keep that gun handy." They left the sheriff's office and Delilah felt like she was walking in a dream. She'd faced Donovan, she'd told the truth, and she was still alive. "You were incredible," Caleb said as they walked back to the boarding house. "I was terrified." Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. He stopped, turning to face her. I've never seen anything like that. You stared down a killer and didn't flinch. I flinched plenty on the inside. But not on the outside. That's what counts. Caleb's hand came up, cupping her face. Delilah Foster, you're the strongest woman I've ever met. I'm not strong, I'm just tired of being afraid. That's the same thing. His thumb brushed her cheek, and the tenderness in the gesture made her eyes sting with tears. You asked me before how I feel about you. You want to know the truth? Yes, I'm falling in love with you. The words were raw, honest. I didn't plan it, didn't want it. But I can't help it. Every day I watch you work, watch you hold your head high when people whisper about you, watch you choose courage over comfort, and I fall a little more. Delilah's breath caught. Caleb, you don't have to say anything. I know it's too soon. I know you need time. But I wanted you to know after today, after watching you face down your demons. I wanted you to know that I see you, all of you, and I love what I see. She reached up, covering his hand with hers. I've made so many mistakes. I've been so many things I'm ashamed of. So have I. Maybe that's why this works. We both know what it's like to carry regrets. Caleb's voice softened. But we also know what it's like to want something better, to want to be better. I want that with you, Delilah whispered. I want to build something real, something honest. No more lies. No more running. Then let's make our future right. Caleb leaned down, and his lips brushed hers in a kiss that was gentle and fierce all at once. It tasted like promise and hope and new beginnings. Delilah kissed him back, pouring all her fear and hope and longing into it. When they finally pulled apart, she was breathless. What happens now? She asked. Now we live, we work, we build a life together one day at a time. Caleb kept his hand on her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. And we deal with whatever comes together. It sounded so simple. So impossibly, wonderfully simple. Over the next few weeks, Delilah and Caleb grew closer. They were careful, mindful of the gossip already swirling around Delilah, but they stopped hiding their affection. They walked together in the evenings, sat together at meals, and slowly, the people of Ash Fork began to accept them as a couple. Donovan hadn't been seen since the confrontation in the sheriff's office, but Delilah knew better than to think he'd given up. She was careful, never going anywhere alone, always aware of her surroundings. Caleb found work as a ranch hand at the Double B Ranch, a sprawling operation owned by a weathered cattleman named Ben Butler. The work was hard but honest, and Caleb threw himself into it with the same intensity he brought to everything. Delilah continued working for Mrs. Patterson, and together they began to save money, talking quietly about their future. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Caleb said, I've been thinking about buying some land. Nothing fancy, just a small spread where we could run a few cattle, maybe some horses. Delilah's heart skipped. If you'll have me. He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. I know we haven't known each other long, but I can't imagine my future without you in it. Marry me, Delilah. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't a demand. It was simply a statement of intent, an offering of his heart. I've made mistakes, Delilah said softly. You know what I've done, what I was. And I've told you what I've done. We've both made mistakes. Caleb took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. But that's in the past. What matters is what we do from here on. Let's make our future right together. Delilah thought about Thomas, about the wedding she'd run from, about all the times she'd tried to be someone she wasn't. With Caleb, she didn't have to pretend. He knew all her secrets, all her shame, and loved her anyway. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Caleb's face split into a grin, and he pulled her close, kissing her with a joy that made her laugh. When? Soon, as soon as we can arrange it. Tomorrow. He was half joking, but there was hope in his eyes. "Give me a week. I want to do this right." Delilah touched his face, memorizing the planes and angles. "I want to marry you in a dress I choose, in front of people who know the truth about us. No lies this time." "No lies," Caleb agreed. They told Mrs. Patterson that evening, and the older woman surprised them both by tearing up. "It's about time," she said, pulling Delilah into a fierce hug. "I've been watching you two moon over each other for weeks." "We haven't been mooning," Delilah protested, laughing. "You absolutely have. It's been nauseating and wonderful in equal measure." Mrs. Patterson released her and turned to Caleb. "You treat her right, you hear me? She's been through enough." "I will, I promise." The week passed in a blur of preparations. Delilah made herself a simple dress of pale yellow calico, nothing fancy but pretty in its simplicity. Mrs. Patterson baked a cake. The sheriff agreed to stand as witness, along with Ben Butler from the Double B. The day before the wedding, Delilah was in the general store buying ribbon when she overheard two women talking. "I still can't believe he's marrying her," one of them said. "After what she did to poor Thomas. And after what she admitted to being. A saloon girl. Can you imagine?" Delilah's face burned, but she kept her head high as she paid for her ribbon. She was walking out when the first woman called after her. "Miss Foster, wait." Delilah turned, bracing herself for more judgment. But the woman, Martha Green, looked uncomfortable rather than hostile. "I just wanted to say, well, my husband reminded me that none of us are perfect. And you did the right thing, calling off that wedding when you realized you couldn't go through with the lie." Martha twisted her hands together. "I know I haven't been kind to you, but I wanted you to know, I hope you'll be happy. You and Mr. Foster." It was a small thing, a tiny olive branch, but it meant the world. "Thank you, Mrs. Green. That means more than you know." Walking back to the boarding house, Delilah felt lighter. She'd never be fully accepted by everyone in Ash Fork. Some people would always see her past first. But she was beginning to realize that their opinions didn't define her. She could define herself. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Delilah dressed carefully in her yellow dress, pinning her dark hair up with the ribbon she'd bought. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman she recognized. Not the frightened girl who'd run from Missouri. Not the fraud who'd almost married Thomas. Just herself, flawed and real and ready to start over. Mrs. Patterson knocked on her door. "You ready, girl?" "Yes, I think I really am." They walked to the church together, and this time, Delilah felt no fear. A small group waited inside. Sheriff Hendricks and his wife. Ben Butler and a few hands from the Double B. Martha Green and her husband. Thomas wasn't there, but Delilah hadn't expected him to be. He'd left town 2 weeks ago, taking a position at a bank in Tucson. She hoped he'd find happiness. Caleb stood at the front of the church, and when he saw her, his face lit up with such pure joy that Delilah felt tears sting her eyes. This was right. This was real. The ceremony was simple. The Reverend, the same one who'd been prepared to marry her to Thomas, spoke about second chances and redemption. When it came time for vows, Caleb took her hands. "I've made mistakes," he said, his voice carrying in the small church. "I've done things I'm not proud of. But standing here with you, I know that God gives us chances to start over. You're my chance, Delilah. My chance to be the man I want to be. I promise to love you, protect you, and build a life with you that's honest and true." Delilah's voice shook as she spoke her own vows. "I've made mistakes too. I've lied and run and been too afraid to face the truth. But you showed me that the truth, no matter how hard, is better than the prettiest lie. I promise to be honest with you always, to stand by you, and to make our future right. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." The Reverend smiled. "You may kiss your bride." Caleb did, sweetly and thoroughly, and the small congregation applauded. Delilah laughed against his lips, happiness bubbling up inside her like champagne. They had a small celebration at the boarding house, with Mrs. Patterson's cake and coffee. Ben Butler pulled Caleb aside at one point, and when he came back, he was grinning. "Ben's selling me 20 acres of his land, at a price I can afford. Says every married man needs a place to build a home." 20 acres, Delilah's eyes widened. "Caleb, that's wonderful. It's a start. It'll take time to build it into something, but we'll do it together." They spent their wedding night in Caleb's room at the boarding house. And for the first time in her life, Delilah understood what it meant to make love. Not the mechanical transactions she'd performed in the Missouri saloon, not even the tentative affection she'd shared with Thomas during their courtship. This was something entirely different. This was two people joining together in complete trust and honesty, holding nothing back. Afterward, lying in Caleb's arms, Delilah felt a peace she'd never known. "Are you happy?" Caleb asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "More than I ever thought possible." She tilted her head to look at him. "Are you so happy I'm almost afraid? Like if I acknowledge it, it might disappear." "It won't disappear. We won't let it." Delilah pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "We've both fought too hard to get here." They spent the next few months building their life together. Caleb worked on their land during the day, clearing brush and planning where to build their house. Delilah continued working for Mrs. Patterson, saving every penny. In the evenings, they'd ride out to their property and sit together, watching the sun set over land that was truly theirs. The house started as a simple cabin, just one room with a fireplace and a loft, but it was home. They moved in during the fall, and Delilah cried as she unpacked their few possessions, overwhelmed by the reality of having a place that belonged to her. Winter came, cold and harsh even in Arizona. They spent long evenings by the fire, Caleb carving wood while Delilah sewed. They talked about everything, their dreams, their fears, the children they hoped to have someday. "I want a whole houseful," Caleb said one night. 4 or 5 at least. That's a lot of children." Delilah looked up from her mending, amused. "I like the idea of a big family, lots of noise and laughter and chaos." He set down his carving, his expression growing serious. "I want to give them the childhood I didn't have, one where they feel safe and loved." "We'll give them that," Delilah promised. "Together." Spring brought new challenges. A late freeze killed several of their young cattle, a financial blow they could ill afford. Caleb took on extra work to make up the loss, sometimes being gone for days helping with roundup at neighboring ranches. Delilah hated being alone, but she used the time to plant a garden and make improvements to the cabin. She was in the garden one afternoon when she saw riders approaching. Her heart jumped into her throat, fear flooding through her. But as they got closer, she recognized Ben Butler's distinctive gray horse. He wasn't alone, though. 3 other men rode with him, and one of them made her blood run cold. Jack Donovan. Delilah ran for the cabin, grabbing the rifle Caleb had taught her to shoot. She positioned herself in the doorway as the riders approached, the gun steady in her hands. Ben held up his hands as he dismounted. "Easy, Mrs. Foster. We're not here to cause trouble." "Then why is he here?" She didn't take her eyes off Donovan. To her surprise, the man looked different. Older, diminished somehow. He climbed slowly off his horse, moving like someone in pain. "I came to apologize," Donovan said, his voice rough, "and to return your money." Delilah's finger tightened on the trigger. "Is this some kind of trick?" "No trick." Ben stepped between them, his expression grave. "Donovan here got himself shot up in a gunfight in New Mexico, came mighty close to dying, says it made him think about things, about the life he's been living." "I've done terrible things," Donovan said. He pulled a leather pouch from his coat and held it out. "There's $200 in there, what you took from me plus interest. I want you to have it back." "Why?" Delilah didn't lower the rifle. "Because you were right. About Sarah, about everything." Donovan's scarred face twisted. "I hurt people. A lot of people. I can't take any of that back, but I can try to make what amends I can, starting with you." Delilah wanted to believe him, wanted to think that people could change, that redemption was possible even for men like Donovan. But she also remembered the cold rage in his eyes when he'd come looking for her in Ash Fork. "How do I know you're not lying? That this isn't some ploy to get close enough to hurt me?" "You don't," Donovan said simply. "You'll have to take it on faith." "But I'm asking you to give me the chance to make this right." Ben spoke up. "For what it's worth, I believe him. He came to me asking for help finding you, told me the whole story. I wouldn't have brought him here if I thought he meant you harm." Slowly, Delilah lowered the rifle. "Keep your money." "I don't want it, please. It's eating at me, knowing I drove you to stealing because of how I acted." Donovan took a step forward, then stopped when Delilah tensed. "I know I scared you. I know I hurt people you cared about. Let me do this one decent thing." After a long moment, Delilah reached out and took the pouch. It was heavy with coins. "If this is some kind of game, you'll regret it. It's not. I swear it." Donovan backed toward his horse. "I'm leaving the territory, heading to California to try to start over. I wanted to clear my conscience first." He mounted up and the men prepared to leave. At the last moment, Donovan turned back. "That girl, Sarah. I heard she recovered, lost the eye, but she's alive. Working in a dress shop in St. Louis now, doing well for herself." Then they were gone, riding back toward Ash Fork in a cloud of dust. Delilah stood holding the pouch, her mind reeling. When Caleb came home that evening, she told him everything. He listened quietly, his expression troubled. "You believe him? That he's changed?" she asked. "I don't know. People can change, but men like Donovan." Caleb shook his head. "I hope he has, for his sake and everyone else's, but I'm glad he's leaving the territory either way." "What should we do with the money?" "That's up to you. It's yours." Delilah thought about it for a long time. Finally, she said, "I want to use some of it to help other women, women in situations like I was in who need a way out but don't have the resources." "That's a fine idea." Caleb pulled her close. "You're a good person, Delilah Foster. I'm trying to be." With part of Donovan's money, they were able to buy more cattle and improve their land. But Delilah set aside a significant portion, and over the next few months, she quietly helped 3 different women leave bad situations and start over in new towns. She never told them where the money came from. It was enough to know she was making a difference. Summer arrived, hot and dry. The garden flourished despite the heat, and their small herd of cattle grew. Delilah began to feel truly settled, like she'd finally found her place in the world. Then one morning, she woke up feeling ill. At first, she thought it was something she'd eaten, but when the nausea continued day after day, she realized the truth. She was pregnant. The knowledge filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She'd always wanted children, but the thought of bringing a baby into the world was daunting. What if she wasn't a good mother? What if her past somehow tainted her child's future? When she told Caleb, he lifted her off her feet, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy." "Delilah, I'm over the moon." He set her down gently, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "Our child. Yours and mine." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. The women of Ash Fork, perhaps softened by time or by the obvious happiness of the foster marriage, began to warm to Delilah. They offered advice and baby clothes, included her in sewing circles. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was more than she dared hope for. Mrs. Patterson was ecstatic. "I'm going to be a grandmother," she declared, despite having no biological connection to either Delilah or Caleb. "That child is going to be spoiled rotten. I'm warning you now." As Delilah's belly swelled through the fall and into winter, she and Caleb spent evenings making plans and preparing the cabin. Caleb built a cradle from smooth pine wood, carving it with delicate patterns of horses and stars. Delilah sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart swelling with love for a child she hadn't yet met. The baby came in late February, during a cold snap that frosted the windows and turned the world white. The labor was long and difficult, attended by Mrs. Patterson and the town's midwife, a capable woman named Anna Hayes. Caleb paced outside the bedroom, looking more terrified than Delilah had ever seen him. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Anna wrapped him in a blanket and handed him to Delilah. "You have a son," she said, smiling. "A son." Delilah looked down at the tiny face, at the dark wisps of hair and the blue eyes that would probably turn brown like hers. She felt a love so fierce it was almost painful, a protective instinct that dwarfed everything she'd ever felt before. Caleb was allowed in, and he sat beside the bed, staring at his son with awe-struck wonder. "He's perfect. He is." Delilah touched the baby's tiny hand, marveling when his fingers wrapped around hers. "What should we name him?" They'd discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Caleb said, "James, after my father before he turned hard, when he was still a good man. James Foster." Delilah tried it out, liking the way it sounded. "It's perfect." The first few weeks were exhausting. James was a fussy baby who rarely slept more than an hour or two at a stretch. Delilah walked the floor with him night after night, singing lullabies her mother had once sung to her. Caleb helped when he could, but he still had to work the ranch. So much of the burden fell on Delilah. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed, when the crying and the exhaustion threatened to break her. But then she'd look at her son's face, or Caleb would come in from the cold and wrap his arms around both of them, and she'd remember how lucky she was. Spring came again, and James began to settle into more regular patterns. Delilah started bringing him with her when she visited Mrs. Patterson in town, and the older woman doted on him shamelessly. Other women began to soften too, stopped by to admire the baby and offer advice. Martha Green became an unexpected friend, stopping by the cabin regularly to help with washing or cooking. She told Delilah about her own children, grown now and moved away, and the loneliness of an empty nest. "You did a brave thing," Martha said one afternoon as they shelled peas together while James napped. "Calling off that wedding to Thomas. It would have been easier to go through with it, but you chose honesty instead. I respect that." "It didn't feel brave at the time. It felt terrifying." "The bravest things usually do." Martha glanced at Delilah. "I judged you harshly when the truth came out. I'm sorry for that. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I realized I was angry at you for having the courage I never had." "What do you mean?" Martha was quiet for a moment. "My husband, Robert, he's a good man now. But when we first married, he drank. A lot. He'd get mean when he drank, and I took the brunt of it. I stayed because I didn't think I had a choice, because I was ashamed to admit my marriage wasn't perfect. Martha, I had no idea. Nobody did. I hid it well. Robert finally stopped drinking about 10 years ago, joined the church, became the man I'd always hoped he'd be. But those early years..." She shook her head. "When I saw you standing up there, admitting your mistakes and walking away from a lie, I was jealous. I wish I'd had that kind of strength." Delilah reached across and took Martha's hand. "It's never too late to be honest about what we've survived." Their friendship deepened after that conversation, and through Martha, other doors began to open. Delilah found herself being invited to social gatherings. her opinion sought on town matters. It was a slow integration, but it was real. James grew from an infant into a toddler, all chubby legs and infectious giggles. He had Delilah's dark hair and eyes, but Caleb's smile and stubborn determination. Watching him explore the world with fearless curiosity filled Delilah with such joy she sometimes had to stop and catch her breath. The ranch prospered. Through hard work and careful management, Caleb built their small spread into something substantial. They added onto the cabin, creating separate bedrooms and a proper kitchen. They bought more land from Ben Butler, expanding their grazing area. It wasn't a huge operation, but it was enough to support their family comfortably. On James's second birthday, Delilah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she wasn't afraid. She was ready, confident in her ability to mother, excited to give James a sibling. The second pregnancy was easier than the first, and their daughter arrived on a warm September evening, just as the sun was setting. She came quickly, with far less drama than James, as if eager to join the family. They named her Clara after Caleb's grandmother, and from the moment she arrived, she was different from her brother. Where James was wild and energetic, Clara was calm and observant. She watched everything with wide eyes, taking in the world with quiet intensity. Watching Caleb with their children, Delilah sometimes had to remind herself that this was real. This life, this love, this family they'd built together. It seemed impossible that she'd once been that frightened girl in a Missouri saloon, or the woman standing outside a church unable to face her own lies. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked one evening. They were sitting on the porch while the children slept inside, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "How far we've come, both of us." Delilah leaned against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about who we were before?" "Sometimes, but mostly I think about who we are now, who we're becoming." Caleb's arm came around her. "We've built something good here, Delilah, something real." "We have." She tilted her head to look at him. "Do you have any regrets?" "Just one. I regret all the time I wasted before I found you." He kissed her forehead. "But I wouldn't change anything else. Even the mistakes, even the hard times, they brought us here." "I've made so many mistakes," Delilah said softly. "So have I." Caleb's voice was equally quiet. "But let's make our future right." It was an echo of the vows they'd spoken years ago, and it still held the same power. They'd both come from darkness, both carried scars and regrets. But they'd chosen each other, chosen honesty and courage over comfort and lies. And in doing so, they'd created something beautiful. The years continued to pass. James grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch and the cattle, who followed his father everywhere and hung on his every word. Clara was quieter but just as determined, with a gift for gentling even the most skittish horses. They added a third child, another son they named Samuel, who was pure joy and mischief from the day he was born. Their ranch became known throughout the territory for quality cattle and fair dealing. Caleb's reputation as an honest man spread, and people came from miles around to do business with him. Delilah became known too, not for her past but for her kindness and the quiet help she gave to women in need. The money from Donovan was long since spent on helping others, but Delilah continued the work, setting aside a portion of their profits each year for women who needed a fresh start. She never advertised what she did, but word spread anyway, and women began to seek her out. Some were running from abusive husbands. Others were widows with no means of support. A few were former saloon girls like Delilah had been, looking for a way to escape that life. Delilah helped them all, giving them money for train tickets, letters of introduction to people in other towns, sometimes just a safe place to stay for a few nights while they figured out their next move. "You're making a real difference," Caleb told her one night after she'd helped a young widow and her children get settled in Flagstaff. "These women, they'll remember your kindness for the rest of their lives. I just give them what I wished someone had given me, a chance." Delilah smiled. "Besides, it feels good to turn something terrible into something positive. Donovan's money has probably helped 20 women by now. That feels like justice." On their 10th anniversary, Caleb surprised her with a trip to San Francisco. Mrs. Patterson agreed to watch the children, and they took the train west, staying in a real hotel and eating in fancy restaurants. It was the first time Delilah had ever traveled for pleasure rather than escape, and she reveled in every moment. "I never imagined I'd have a life like this," she told Caleb as they walked along the waterfront, watching ships come and go. "A husband I love, children, a home. It seemed impossible." "Nothing's impossible. We proved that." Caleb pulled her close. "You know what I think about sometimes? That day you stood outside the church, ready to run again. What if I hadn't gone out there? What if I hadn't convinced you to tell the truth? I think about that too. We almost never happened. But we did happen, and I thank God for it every single day." He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Delilah Foster. You and our children." They returned to Ash Fork renewed and refreshed, ready to dive back into the daily rhythms of ranch life. The children had missed them terribly, according to Mrs. Patterson, though she claimed not to have minded their company at all. More years passed. James turned 15, then 16, growing tall and strong like his father. He started courting Sarah Butler, Ben's granddaughter, a sweet girl with a practical mind and a kind heart. Delilah watched them together and saw echoes of her own early days with Caleb, that careful dance of two people learning to trust each other. Clara turned 13, all knees and elbows and fierce intelligence. She announced that she wanted to be a veterinarian, which shocked the town but didn't surprise Delilah at all. Her daughter had always had a gift with animals. Samuel was 10, still young enough to be silly but old enough to have real responsibilities around the ranch. He took them seriously, working hard to prove himself to his father and older brother. One afternoon, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Delilah was in the garden when she saw him, and something about the way he sat his horse made her nervous. She called for Caleb, who came out of the barn wiping grease from his hands. The stranger dismounted, an older man with white hair and weary eyes. "I'm looking for Caleb Foster." "That's me." Caleb's voice was cautious. "My name's Henry Peterson. I'm an attorney from Texas. I've been trying to find you for months." He pulled papers from his saddlebag. "Your brother died, William Foster. He left you his estate." Delilah saw Caleb go pale. "William's dead, passed 6 months ago." Hart gave out. "Before he died, he changed his will, left everything to you." Peterson handed over the papers. "It's a substantial property. 30,000 acres, good water quality stock, worth a considerable fortune." Caleb stared at the papers like they might bite him. "Why would he leave it to me? He hated me. I testified against him." "According to his letter, that's exactly why." Peterson pulled out another document. "He said you were the only one with the courage to do the right thing, even when it cost you everything. He wanted you to have the ranch because he knew you'd run it honestly." After Peterson left, Caleb sat on the porch steps, the papers in his hand, looking lost. Delilah sat beside him, waiting. "I thought I'd never go back to Texas," he finally said. "I swore after prison that I'd never set foot there again." "You don't have to go back. You could sell the property, sign it over to someone else. 30,000 acres, that's more land than I ever dreamed of owning." Caleb looked at her. "What do you think I should do?" Delilah took his hand. "I think you should do whatever feels right. If you want to sell it and stay here, we stay. If you want to go back and reclaim that part of your past, we'll go together. You'd leave Ash Fork. After everything we've built here, we didn't build a life in Ash Fork. We built a life together. Wherever you are, that's home for me. They talked long into the night, weighing options and possibilities. In the end, Caleb decided to go to Texas and see the property before making any decisions. The whole family made the journey, traveling by train across the territory and into the Lone Star State. The ranch was everything Peterson had described and more. Rolling hills covered in grass, a big house that needed work but had good bones, barns and outbuildings in decent repair. The cattle wore the Foster brand, the same one Caleb's father had used. Walking the land, Caleb was quiet. Delilah watched him process memories and emotions, giving him space to work through it. Finally, he said, "My father built this place from nothing. Then William twisted it into something ugly, used it to hurt people. But underneath, it's still good land. It could be something good again. You want to stay? I think I do. I think I need to. This ranch was my family's legacy, and it deserves better than what it became." He looked at Delilah. "But only if you want to. I won't make you leave Arizona if you don't want to go." Delilah looked around at the vast property, at the children already exploring with excitement, at the house that could become a real home with some work and love. "I want to be wherever you are. And I think this place deserves a second chance, just like we got." They moved to Texas that fall, selling their Arizona property to a young couple just starting out. The transition wasn't easy. The house needed extensive repairs, and the operation was much larger than what they were used to managing. But they approached it the same way they'd approached everything else in their life together, with honesty, hard work, and faith in each other. James thrived on the bigger ranch, taking to the work like he'd been born to it. Within a year, he was managing significant portions of the operation. Clara started corresponding with a veterinary school in the East, determined to pursue her dreams despite the obstacles facing a woman in that field. Samuel discovered a talent for breeding horses, developing an eye for bloodlines that impressed even the most experienced ranchers. Delilah continued her work helping women, finding even more opportunities in Texas. The state was rougher, wilder, with more women in desperate circumstances. She worked quietly, funding escapes and fresh starts, earning a reputation as someone who could be trusted. Years continued their steady march. James married Sarah Butler, who'd followed him to Texas, and they gave Delilah and Caleb their first grandchild, a girl they named Delilah. Holding her tiny namesake, Delilah wept with joy, thinking about how far she'd come from that terrified woman in a borrowed wedding dress. Clara defied expectations and got accepted to veterinary school, becoming one of the first women to do so. The pride Delilah felt when her daughter graduated was almost overwhelming. Samuel married a rancher's daughter and started his own breeding operation on a portion of the property. Caleb and Delilah grew older together, their hair graying, their bodies slowing, but their love only deepening. They'd spent over 30 years together, building a life that neither could have imagined in those early days. One evening, sitting on the porch of the big house watching the sunset paint the Texas sky, Delilah said, "Do you remember what you told me the day we met? That we've all done things we're not proud of." "I remember." Caleb's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "I used to think my mistakes defined me, that I'd always be that saloon girl, that thief, that liar. But you're not. No. I'm a wife, a mother, a grandmother. I've helped dozens of women start over. I've built something good and lasting." Delilah smiled. "My mistakes are part of my story, but they're not the whole story. Neither are mine." Caleb squeezed her hand. We took our regrets and turned them into something better. We made our future right. We did. Delilah leaned her head on his shoulder, content. And I'd do it all again, every mistake, every hardship, just to end up here with you. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from broken pieces. Behind them, the house was full of family, children and grandchildren, the product of their love and determination. Delilah thought about that terrified young woman who'd stood outside a church in Arizona, unable to face another lie. If she could go back and tell her younger self anything, it would be this: the truth will set you free, and love is possible even for the broken. She'd made mistakes. So had Caleb. But together, they'd proven that mistakes don't have to be the end of the story. They can be the beginning of something better, if you're brave enough to be honest and strong enough to change. As the last light faded from the sky and the first cool breeze of evening stirred the air, Delilah closed her eyes and smiled. She was home. She was loved. She was enough. And that was more than she'd ever dared to dream.